Hello everyone. In this video, we will be looking at Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas, and we'll be delving into the death and disease theme within the poem. To do so, we will first hear the poem from Dylan Thomas himself, then we'll look at the features of the poem, and finally, we will be analyzing the poem in light of the death and disease theme. So first off, let's hear it from Dylan Thomas.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Brave men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
Okay, that was a beautiful reading by Dylan Thomas himself. Now let's take a look at the form of the poem, as in the type, the rhyme scheme, and the scale. This is a very unique form of poetry. It's called a villanelle. A villanelle has 19 lines. These 19 lines are almost always composed of 5 tercets, so 3 lines in each. So 3 lines in each of the stanzas, and finally a quatrain, which is a 4-line stanza. The rhyme scheme for a villanelle is always ABA, 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 and finally ABAA. The scale for this particular poem is an iambic pentameter. And what this means is an iamb, or a foot, is 2 syllables. So we have 5 2-syllable groups. And in what's specific about an iambic pentameter is that you see the pattern of D-dum, which means that the first syllable is not stressed and the second syllable is stressed. I'm showing you all of these to show you how difficult it was for Dylan Thomas to come up with the words that match these criteria and this rhyme scheme. So to see this further, let's look at the next page. What we see here is the ABA rhyme scheme throughout the entire poem. So each red word is going to rhyme with the rest of the red words, and each yellow word is going to rhyme with all the other yellow words. So we are seeing that it's an ABA rhyme scheme throughout all 5 tercets, and in the final quatrain we are seeing the ABAA. What's also more interesting is that we are seeing night and light all the time. So the poem begins with, in the first line, with night, and then goes to light in the third line, goes to night in the sixth line, and then goes to light in the ninth line, and keeps going on like this. And what we are also seeing is that the first and the third lines are repeated throughout the poem, and then they meet at the very end in the 18th and 19th line. These are called refrains. They are repeated pieces of lines in a poem, and they alternate as well. So each stanza ends with one of these, and the alternation is that one is the first stanza ends with rage against the dying of the light, and the second stanza ends with do not go gentle into that good night. Third one goes back to rage against the dying of the light, and then the fourth stanza goes back to do not go gentle into that good night. So let's take a look at stanza 1 and see that we have the metaphor of night equaling death, and that light, that which also means that light equals life. And for the first stanza, each line ends with a different way of saying nighttime. Close of day and dying of the light both refer to nighttime, and this is suggesting maybe the nearing of death. And as each day comes to an end at night, we are kind of seeing a reference to the inevitability of death. In these three lines, what we are seeing is a lot of the poet is saying, do not go, and rage. So these are imperatives. And this is kind of like giving an order to someone. And then we also see the modal word should. What these usually signal is a frustration and anger. So you're asking someone to do something, but you're also kind of putting the should model. So kind of gives us the vibe that someone close is dying, maybe. In the second stanza, we see that the metaphor of our nighttime is continued through the use of the word dark, which also equals death, basically. What the poet is doing here with the use of wise men is that he's giving an example to the addressed, saying, look at what the wise men do in their lifetime. So to make a better sense of this particular stanza, it's better to read it in alternating order. So we'll read line 4, 6, and then back to 5. So how this will happen is, though wise men at their end know dark is right, do not go gentle into that good night, because their words had forked no lightning. So basically, even though men who are smart, who have wisdom, who are wise, know that dark, meaning death, is always right, they don't go gently into the good night, because their words, in this case, words meaning their actions, their works, what they're leaving behind, their legacy, had forked no lightning. So forking a lightning in this case might mean that a lightning is a single bolt, and to fork a lightning, you have to take an action. You have to do something significant. You have to maybe put a lightning rod against it to split it into two pieces. So their actions had no significant impact in their surrounding, is what this stanza is suggesting, basically. And before we go any further, even though we said that night was a metaphor for death, why do you think the poet chose to say good night? Why is death good in this case? Let's think about this as we read this poem as well. And then at the end, we'll take a look back at it. Looking at stanza 3, we see that the metaphor of night has switched places with a contrast. Instead of saying night or dark, the poet says bright at the end of line 7. So this contrast kind of makes it oxymoronic, when everything else was dark and nighttime, we are looking at brightness. We see the imagery here also. Last wave by. So a wave happens in an ocean or a sea or a stream, but let's think of this as an ocean. The last wave by means that the wave forms in the ocean and then comes crashing onto the bay, onto the shore. The last wave in this case means that it's the last stretch of the life of that particular wave, right? So what this stanza is saying is that good men, at the beginning of line 7, they rage because they did not have enough time to make their brittle deeds have more meaning. Their actions, they didn't have enough time to make their actions have more meaning, basically. So they rage against the dying of the light. In the next stanza, we'll look at wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight. So again, as we said, sun is the daytime equals life. So some wild men were able to catch the sun in flight. So they were able to catch life as it was going by. So wild men do not go gentle into that good night because they caught life as it was going by. Their regret is that they were not enough, or they did not pay enough attention to enjoy life. Instead, they were too busy being sad about the fact that life was passing by. They realized too late that instead of mourning the passing of life, they should have enjoyed it more. So in a way, this is going towards the ideology of carpe diem, seize the day kind of thing. Let's look at the next stanza. This one is an interesting one because we have the beginning of line 13 says grave men near death. So grave is where somebody is buried when they die, but it also means serious. So what we see is that there are two meanings, and that's called a double entendre, and that's provided to us by the use of a pun. Grave has two meanings, so it's a pun, and using it in both meanings is possible. So we can interpret it in both as serious men or grave men, so people who are entombed or something like that. So in that sense, we have two meanings all molded into one piece. We also have some oxymorons, so things that shouldn't appear together, basically. A blinding sight, so blindness and sight shouldn't appear together. And blind eyes usually are closed, so they shouldn't be able to blaze. So we are seeing oxymorons of blinding sight and blind eyes blazing. What this stanza is saying is that men who are near death and lost their ability to see can see metaphorically. They can see clearer than ever before and be happy that their life continues. So they rage against the end of their life. So even though their old age put them near death. They're able to see clearer than ever before that they can enjoy life, and that's why they rage against the end of their life. And finally, in the last stanza, or the quatrain, what we have is that the poet is addressing his father here. You, my father, there on the sad height. So the sad height here could refer to the difference in age between the poet and his father, or it could also be an allusion to the idea of the value of death, basically, in the Christian faith. Whether or not, which one is true, I have no idea. He is again using imperative forms of curse and bless. Again, do not go. These are all imperative forms, but at the end of line 17, he is saying, I pray. So we are seeing some pleading from the poet. Basically, he is saying, do something, do anything. Just don't go into that good night. So he's saying, just don't die. Do something, anything, but don't die. And stand up and fight against dying, basically. So with this line, we are done with the poem. And what we're going to do is to take a final look. What we are seeing in this poem is that death is final and inevitable. And basically, throughout the entire poem, we were seeing instances of how one should defy death. They shouldn't just, surrender to it. You shouldn't just accept death as it is, but fight against it. We are seeing that both old age and disease may bring us close to the brink of death, but even then, we must do everything in our power to live life to the fullest. Never succumb to the sweetness and ease of giving in to death. And that's where I was saying, into that good night at the end of the first line. Into that good night. What makes death good is that it's easy, it's sweet, it's as long as you're not willing to fight it, it's easy to die. So that's where I come up with the idea that sweetness and ease of giving into death is something we should never succumb to. And basically, despite the inevitability of death, one must live life fully and fight until the very end, which kind of reminds me of Nazım Hikmet's final lines of his poem. Yani nasıl ve nerede olursak olalım, hiç ölünmeyecekmiş gibi yaşanacak. To translate it into English, meaning regardless of how or where we are, life shall be lived as though we will never die. So that is the end of my video here, and thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it.